The city never slept. New York's skyline shimmered against the velvet dark skyscrapers, rising like silent sentinels, their glass facades reflecting a million fragments of light. Yet silence pressed down like a suffocating fog within the Walker penthouse, one of the tallest towers piercing the Manhattan sky. Charlotte Baker sat at the long mahogany dining table, a table far too grand for one woman, and a meal prepared with trembling care. The aroma of rosemary roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and sautéed green beans still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint citrus of her perfume. Everything was arranged perfectly. The candles lit the silver, polished the wine, breathing beside her glass. Over the years, she had learned that perfection was the only language Charles Walker seemed to understand. 3 years of marriage had taught her how to move soundlessly, prepare without complaint, and smile through disappointment. And yet, despite all her rehearsals, she still flinched each time the clock ticked past another minute of his absence. Her phone vibrated against the table, breaking the silence, a notification. Her heart jumped. Perhaps it was him. Maybe tonight finally he would remember. But it wasn't Charles. Maya, her oldest friend, was her last anchor to a world beyond this glittering cage. "Charlotte, are you watching the news?" Confused, Charlotte clicked on the attached link. The live stream loaded instantly, the bold headline screaming across the screen. CEO Charles Walker was spotted in Los Angeles with Hollywood actress Vanessa Moore. The footage was unmistakable. Charles, impeccably tailored, impossibly tall, walking through LAX with Vanessa Moore, America's sweetheart, his so-called first love. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and Vanessa clung to his arm like it belonged to her. Charlotte's vision blurred. The words on the screen fractured, but one phrase remained etched into her mind. The power couple everyone has been waiting for. Her chest tightened. Tonight was their wedding anniversary. 3 years, and he was across the country with another woman. The elevator chimed. Her heart stumbled in her chest. Charles was home. The penthouse doors slid open, and there he stood, immaculate as always, tailored suit still crisp, despite the flight hair, neatly combed back, expression unreadable. His presence filled the room, commanding, distant like a winter storm, contained in human form. "You're home," Charlotte said softly, her voice careful, almost reverent. He nodded once, slipping out of his jacket without looking at her. "Yes." She gestured to the table, her smile trembling. "I cooked your favorite, roasted chicken with rosemary. It's our anniversary, Charles." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then his gaze flicked to the table, then to her, cold and sharp as glass. "Charlotte," he said, his voice low, devoid of warmth. "After my grandmother's birthday celebration next week, we're filing for divorce." The words crashed into her like a tidal wave, leaving her breathless. Divorce. Her voice cracked the single word, tasting foreign on her tongue. "Because of Vanessa." He didn't answer immediately. He reached into his briefcase, withdrew a crisp envelope, and laid it on the table between them. Inside was a divorce agreement, neatly typed, brutally impersonal. Sliding the papers toward her, he said, "You don't need to know why. You only need to sign. Once you do, you'll receive a settlement far beyond anything you could want. More than what my grandmother promised you when I married you." The air left her lungs in a rush. "So that's all I was to you," she whispered. "A bargain. A contract to please your grandmother." His eyes flickered, but only for a moment. "Don't push this, Charlotte. Sign it, and this ends cleanly. Refuse, and it will only get uglier." Her hands trembled, but she forced them still. For 3 years, she had lived like a ghost in this marriage, unwanted, unseen, unloved. She had endured the cold nights, the silence, the way his touch never lingered. But betrayal was something else. She rose slowly, the candlelight catching the steel in her dark eyes. "You've treated me like air, Charles. 3 years I lived invisible, hoping you'd finally look at me one day. But if this is what you want, if you would rather chase ghosts of your past than see the woman in front of you, then fine." Her voice no longer shook. It cut like glass. "I'll sign. But don't think for 1 second you'll get to break me." For the first time, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. She was not the submissive wife he had grown used to. She was fire, unpredictable, unyielding. "Charlotte," he warned, but she was already walking away. At the doorway, she turned, her gaze locked with his. She said, "One more thing," her lips curving into a bitter smile. "You should schedule an appointment with a doctor. 3 years of marriage, one bed, and nothing between us." "The problem isn't me, Charles. Perhaps it's you." The words hit their mark. His eyes flared, his pride wounded in the one place he was most vulnerable. But Charlotte didn't wait for his reply. She disappeared into the shadows of the penthouse, her footsteps echoing like a declaration. She felt something shift deep inside her for the first time in 3 years. A chain had broken. A cage had opened. And though her heart still bled, she knew this much: she would no longer live as Charles Walker's invisible wife. The night spread heavy and deep across Manhattan. In the silence of the penthouse, Charles Walker stood alone, staring at the untouched meal, the flickering candles, and the divorce papers lying between them. Her words echoed in his head sharper than any blade. "Maybe the problem isn't me. Perhaps it's you." His hand tightened into a fist, but beneath the anger, a different sensation gnawed at him, one he hadn't felt in years: unease. The morning after was mercilessly clear. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Walker penthouse, spilling gold across marble floors and glass walls. The city below roared with its usual rhythm, horns, voices, the endless pulse of New York. But inside the penthouse, the silence felt heavier than ever. Charlotte stood at the window with coffee untouched, watching yellow cabs weave through traffic. She had barely slept. The words, "We're filing for divorce," replayed in her mind like a broken record. But strangely, the ache wasn't as sharp as she had expected. Instead, something new had begun to stir within her, a quiet, simmering fire. She had spent 3 years waiting for Charles Walker to love her. 3 years building her life around a man who saw her as nothing more than a contract. And now, standing there in the morning light, Charlotte realized something with startling clarity. She was done waiting. Her phone buzzed again, Maya ever watchful. "Are you okay?" Charlotte's fingers flew across the screen. "I will be." She set the coffee down, walked to the closet, and stared at rows of designer dresses, most of which had never seen daylight. Charles's money had dressed her, but none of it felt like her. None of it spoke of the ambitious young woman she used to be, the Charlotte Baker who once walked the runways of Milan as a designer, not as a wife. The Charlotte sketched gowns until dawn because she believed beauty could change the world. That Charlotte had been buried under 3 years of cold stares and silence. But not anymore. She opened Charles's drawer, where he kept his collection of sleek black credit cards, and pulled one out. Platinum. Unlimited. He had tossed it at her once, as though it were compensation for affection, muttering, "Use it if you need something." Well, today she needed something. Not things exactly. Symbols. A declaration. By noon, Charlotte walked down Fifth Avenue with her head held high, the fall breeze catching the silk scarf at her throat. The street was alive with tourists and locals, but Charlotte moved with the grace of someone rediscovering her own gravity. Store after store welcomed her, the shimmering crystal of Tiffany's, the velvet elegance of Bergdorf Goodman, the gilded arches of Saks. "Charge it to this," she told the sales associate with a calm smile, sliding Charles's platinum card across the counter. Dresses, heels, handbags, perfumes. She didn't need any of it. But each purchase felt like a reclamation, a step toward reminding herself that she could choose and live boldly, even recklessly, without asking permission. When she left the last boutique, her arms were full of bags, and whispers followed her. That's Charlotte Walker, the soon-to-be ex-wife. She looks stunning, fierce, spending his money before she leaves him. Good for her. Charlotte caught fragments of the gossip, but didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive. She dropped the bags onto the floor in the penthouse and walked to the mirror. A woman gazed back at her. Tall, dark-skinned, beautiful, in a way that carried elegance and fire. Not invisible, not silent, not the shadow of a billionaire's indifference. "Hello, Charlotte Baker," she whispered. Not Mrs. Walker, not anyone's afterthought, just herself. Her chest lifted with a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The truth was clear. She needed to return to the world she once loved, to reclaim her career, to prove not to Charles' society, but to herself that she was more than a contract wife. That evening, Charlotte pulled out a leather-bound sketchbook from a locked drawer she hadn't opened in years. The pages smelled faintly of graphite and ink, and her fingers trembled as she flipped through the designs. Gowns, like cascades of water suits, cut sharp enough to slice through arrogance. Every sketch whispered to her, "You were an artist before you were a wife." She set the book on the desk and began to draw. Hours slipped as pencil met paper, ideas flowing like a river finally freed from a dam. Midnight came and went, but Charlotte didn't stop. When the first rays of dawn touched the window, she looked down at the sketch, an evening gown, bold and unapologetic, with lines that screamed freedom. Her decision was made. She would return to fashion. Not quietly, not cautiously. She would return to the very heart of the industry, to the place she had abandoned when she married Charles Walker. Walker Group's fashion division. "Are you serious?" Maya nearly choked on her latte when Charlotte shared her plan the next day. They sat in a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from the glitz of Manhattan, a place that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, warm and genuine. "Yes," Charlotte said firmly. "I'm applying. If they won't have me, another firm will." Maya's eyes softened with pride. "That's the Charlotte I know. But Walker Group, won't that put you face to face with him?" Charlotte's lips curved, half smile, half challenge. "Exactly. Let him watch as I build something without his name. Let him see I don't need him." Maya reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Then promise me one thing. Don't go back to being silent. Make them hear you." Charlotte nodded, and for the first time she truly believed she could. 2 weeks later, Charlotte walked into the towering glass headquarters of Walker Group, her portfolio in hand, her chin high. The receptionist glanced up, startled, then masked her expression. News of the Walkers' impending divorce had traveled fast. The interview room was sleek, intimidating, and filled with executives who looked at her with curiosity and skepticism. "What makes you think you're qualified to lead in this department, Mrs. Walker?" One of them asked, the words sharp, almost mocking. Charlotte smiled coolly. "First, it's Ms. Baker. And second, you've already seen my work on runways in Paris, Milan, and New York before I stepped back for my marriage. You've read my reviews. You've seen the awards. You know I can take this division where it needs to go." She slid her sketches across the table. The designs were bold, fresh, and electric, blending modern American strength with elegance rooted in her identity. The room fell silent. One executive leaned forward, almost reverent. "These are extraordinary." By the end of the week, Charlotte Baker was officially appointed head of design for Walker Group's fashion division. News spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed. The ex-wife is back. Charlotte Baker was named head of design at Walker Group. Drama at the top. Will Charles Walker tolerate his soon-to-be ex running one of his divisions? Reporters camped outside the building, hungry for photos of her. And in his office, high above Manhattan, Charles Walker sat at his desk. The city sprawled out beneath him, the headline glowing across his tablet. Charlotte Baker returns to Walker Group. His jaw tightened. He had expected her to crumble, to take the settlement, disappear quietly, and remain a shadow. Instead, she was rising in his company under his watch. Something cold flickered in his chest, but beneath it, buried deep, was something else he didn't want to name. Charlotte left the building that evening, the autumn air cool against her skin. Paparazzi flashes lit up around her, questions hurled like stones. Charlotte, is this revenge against your husband? Are you using his company to prove a point? Do you think Charles Walker regrets marrying you? She didn't flinch. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her face to the cameras, her gaze steady, her smile subtle but fierce. Let them speculate. Let them wonder. She was no longer invisible. She was Charlotte Baker, a woman designer and survivor. And this was only the beginning. As she slipped into the waiting car, her reflection caught in the tinted glass. She whispered to herself, "This time, I'm writing my own story." The city lights blurred as the car pulled away, but inside her chest the fire burned brighter than ever. The Walker Group tower loomed over Park Avenue like a citadel, its glass and steel catching the pale morning light. To New Yorkers, it was a symbol of power, wealth, and ruthlessness. To Charlotte Baker, stepping through its revolving doors felt like stepping into a battlefield, where her opponent wasn't just the cutthroat fashion world and the man who owned every inch of this building. The marble lobby hummed with activity assistants rushing past with tablets, executives murmuring over phone calls, security guards stationed with military precision. As Charlotte walked in, heels clicking against the polished floor, heads turned. Whispers followed her like shadows. Isn't that Mrs. Walker, ex-wife soon-to-be? Why would she work here of all places? Bold move, or a suicide mission? Charlotte kept her gaze forward, shoulders straight, refusing to let their words cut. She had dressed deliberately that morning, a tailored ivory pantsuit that sharpened every line of her silhouette, paired with understated gold jewelry that whispered confidence rather than wealth. She wasn't here as Charles Walker's wife or ex-wife. She was here as Charlotte Baker, head of design. Her new office was on the 32nd floor, overlooking the skyline, with floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in natural light. The previous head's nameplate had been removed. Hers gleamed freshly on the door, Charlotte Baker, head of design. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and paper. A vase of white lilies sat on the desk, a congratulatory gift from Maya. Charlotte touched the petals lightly, then placed her sketchbook on the desk as if planting a flag. She settled in no sooner than her bright-eyed but nervous assistant, a young woman named Kelly, knocked gently. "Good morning, Ms. Baker. The design team is waiting for your introduction meeting in the conference room." Charlotte smiled warmly. "Thank you, Kelly. And please call me Charlotte." Kelly's cheeks flushed. "Yes, Charlotte." The conference room was filled with the division's designers, interns, and executives. Some looked at her with cautious respect, others with thinly veiled skepticism. Charlotte could feel the weight of their judgment. She's only here because she married him. She won't last a month. She placed her portfolio on the table, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat before she spoke. "I know what some of you are thinking." She began calm, but commanding. "I'm here because of my last name, that I was handed this position." A few exchanged guilty glances. Charlotte opened the portfolio, revealing sketches from her earlier career designs that had graced Milan and Paris runways, designs reviewed in Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. "These," she said, sliding the sketches across the table, "are not the work of Mrs. Walker. They're the work of Charlotte Baker. I earned every stitch, review, and invitation before wearing a ring." The room quieted. Eyes lingered on her sketches, some impressed, despite themselves. She continued, "I don't expect trust immediately," her dark eyes steady. "But I do expect professionalism. I'm not here to play safe. I'm here to make Walker Group's fashion division a leader, not a follower. If you want to coast, if you wish to comfort, this isn't your department. If you want to innovate, you'll find no one more committed than me." Silence. Then slowly, one of the senior designers nodded. "Understood, Ms. Baker." Charlotte exhaled quietly. Round one hers. Later that afternoon, while Charlotte was reviewing fabric samples, her office door opened without a knock. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Charles Walker filled the doorway, pulling all the air from the room. His suit was navy, perfectly tailored, his tie a shade darker than midnight. His expression was unreadable, carved in stone. "Enjoying your first day?" he asked coolly. Charlotte looked up, unflinching. "I am. Thank you for asking." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "After a divorce, you'd have no place in this company." "You thought wrong," she replied, her voice calm but edged with steel. "The board saw my portfolio. They hired me. Your personal feelings don't outweigh my qualifications." A flicker of something anger. Amusement crossed his eyes. "You think this is about qualifications? Charlotte, this is the Walker Group. My group. You're playing in my world now." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then it's time someone reminded you that your world isn't invincible." For a heartbeat silence. Their eyes locked hers, defiant, his burning. It was a collision, silent but violent, charged with years of silence, betrayal, and unspoken things. Finally, Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Be careful, Charlotte. This company isn't forgiving, and neither am I." Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the electric tension between them. She rose from her chair slowly until they stood nearly chest to chest. "Neither am I," she whispered. Charlotte's presence had become the building's favorite topic by the second week. "Did you see her designs? Brilliant. She's bold. But Walker won't let her last. They say she humiliated him once. Something about a doctor comment. No wonder he's furious." Charlotte ignored the whispers. She worked late sketching until her hands cramped, guiding her team with clarity and vision. Yet every time she walked the halls, she felt Charles's presence like a shadow looming, watching. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him in meetings, his eyes flicking toward her briefly before turning away. Other times, their paths crossed in the elevator silence, stretching between them like a taut wire, the air too thick to breathe. The clash came sooner than expected. One evening, Charlotte presented her proposal for the upcoming fall collection to the executive board. The designs were daring, structured silhouettes, mixed with bold, African-inspired patterns, paying homage to her heritage, while pushing modern boundaries. The room buzzed with interest. But before the vote could be called, Charles entered. His presence silenced the room. "I've reviewed these proposals," he said, his tone clipped, "and I find them risky. Too risky for our brand." Charlotte's jaw tightened. With respect, Charles, fashion without risk isn't fashion, it's mediocrity. Playing it safe is why this division has stagnated. If we want relevance, we must innovate. He leaned against the table, eyes locked on hers. "And if innovation costs us millions?" She rose from her chair, meeting him across the polished wood. "Then it's an investment. Playing it safe has already cost us more, our reputation." The boardroom held its breath. No one had ever spoken to Charles Walker like that. His gaze darkened, but a flicker of something else stirred beneath it. Respect. After a long pause, he straightened. "We'll test your designs, but the responsibility is yours alone. If this fails, you fail. Charlotte lifted her chin. Then I'll succeed. The vote passed. Her collection was approved. That night, Charlotte returned to her office exhausted but exhilarated. The city glowed beyond the windows, alive and electric. She had faced Charles and won. Yet when she closed her eyes, she saw how he had looked at her, the storm in his gaze, the unspoken words between them. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. This was more than a professional battle. It was personal, dangerous, and inevitable. Charlotte felt the intoxicating thrill of standing toe-to-toe with him for the first time in years, not as his wife's shadow or equal. And she knew deep down that this collision was only the beginning. The private jet hummed steadily against the night sky, slicing through clouds on its way to Chicago. Below, the glittering Midwest stretched endlessly, a constellation of city lights against the dark canvas of Earth. Charlotte Baker sat by the window, sketchbook open on her lap, though her pencil hovered uselessly above the paper. Her mind wasn't on design tonight. It was on the meeting tomorrow, her first high-stakes negotiation as head of design. Michael Lambert, CEO of Lambert & Co., a luxury retail empire that could put Walker Group's fashion line into over 200 flagship stores nationwide. The deal was worth millions. More importantly, it was the chance to prove to the board, the world, and perhaps most of all to herself, that she belonged here. But whispers about Lambert had reached her long before this trip. Charming, but ruthless. A shark in the boardroom. A wolf after dark. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She wasn't afraid. She couldn't afford to be. The Lambert Hotel was an architectural marvel, all gleaming black marble and chandeliers that sparkled like falling stars. That night, Lambert hosted a gala celebrating his company's anniversary, though everyone knew it was an excuse to showcase his power. Charlotte arrived in an evening gown of her own design, sleek black silk that hugged her frame, accented with a gold belt that gleamed like fire. Heads turned the moment she entered. She carried herself not as someone's ex-wife, but as a woman in her own right, commanding attention with grace sharper than diamonds. Ms. Baker. A deep voice drawled behind her. She turned. Michael Lambert was precisely as described, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile too polished to be sincere. His gray eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. An honor, he said, kissing the back of her hand with unnecessary pressure. The rumors were true. You're even more captivating in person. Charlotte withdrew her hand smoothly. Your opinion of my designs will be just as flattering, Mr. Lambert. His smile widened predatory. Let's discuss over dinner, privately. Dinner wasn't at a table. It was a secluded lounge on the hotel's top floor, dimly lit, perfumed with expensive cigars and whiskey. Charlotte kept her posture impeccable, her smile polite, but unease curled in her stomach as Lambert poured her a glass of wine himself. He said, I admire women closer than necessary. Most in your position would have disappeared after a divorce. But you come back stronger. That kind of fire, it's rare. Charlotte met his gaze squarely. Rare, perhaps, but not for sale. His laugh was low, indulgent. Everything is for sale, Ms. Baker, especially in this industry. He shifted closer, his knee brushing hers. She froze, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass. Mr. Lambert, she said sharply, if you think I'll trade dignity for a contract, then you've mistaken me. This partnership will stand on merit, or it won't stand at all. His smile vanished. His hand shot out, trapping hers on the table. Careful. Deals this big don't happen without generosity. You give, you receive. That's how the game is played. Charlotte's chest burned with rage, But before she could wrench her hand free, the door swung open. Charles Walker filled the doorway like a storm contained in human form, his presence cutting through the smoky air. His navy suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable, but his eyes icy blue, sharp as glass, locked immediately on Lambert's hand, gripping Charlotte's. "Let go," Charles said, his voice low and dangerous. Lambert chuckled, not moving. "Charles, what a surprise. I didn't know you'd flown in." "I don't announce my moves," Charles replied. His gaze never wavered. "Now I'll repeat myself. Let go." Something in his tone, cold, lethal, made Lambert hesitate. Slowly, he released Charlotte's hand. Charles stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Charlotte's pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to say she didn't need rescuing. She wanted to tell Charles that she was more than capable of handling predators like Lambert. But part of her, the part still reeling from the shock of that moment, remained silent. Lambert smirked, swirling his whiskey. "Relax, Charles. I was just negotiating. Surely you of all people know how these games are played." Charles's jaw tightened. "You mistake the Walker Group for one of your playgrounds. We don't negotiate with vultures." Lambert laughed, though it rang hollow, still as arrogant as ever. His eyes flicked toward Charlotte. "Does your company know how much risk they take by putting her in charge? Beautiful women rarely last in positions of power. They're too distracting." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Charlotte rose slowly, every movement precise, her dignity cutting sharper than any blade. "You're right, Mr. Lambert," she said evenly. "Beautiful women don't last if men like you are allowed to run unchecked. Fortunately for me, I don't answer to men like you. I answer to results, and I assure you I'll deliver." Lambert's smirk faltered. Charles's gaze flicked toward her, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. Pride, admiration. He said nothing, but his silence roared louder than words. The deal was postponed. Lambert stormed off, muttering about unprofessional theatrics. But Charlotte didn't care. She stood tall as she walked out of that lounge, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the cameras flashing as news of the altercation spread through the gala. In the elevator, silence hung heavy between her and Charles. The golden light reflected their faces in the mirrored walls, two figures standing side by side, yet miles apart. "You shouldn't have been there," she said, her tone icy. "You're welcome," he replied dryly. "I didn't need saving." His eyes snapped to hers, piercing. "He would have hurt you." Her chin lifted. "Then I'd have fought back. I don't need you playing hero, Charles. Not after everything." His jaw flexed. For a moment, it looked like he might argue. But instead, he leaned back against the wall, exhaling sharply. "You're reckless," he muttered. "And you're arrogant," she shot back. Their gazes clashed, sparks flying in the confined space. It was anger, but a current neither could deny beneath it. A current that had nothing to do with business. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Without another word, Charlotte walked out, her heels striking the marble like gunfire, leaving Charles behind with the weight of silence. Later that night, Charlotte sat on the balcony of her suite, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly before her. The city lights shimmered like a sea of stars, but her thoughts were anything but calm. She hated that Charles had appeared. She hated that Lambert's touch had left her shaken. But most of all, she hated that part of her had felt safe when Charles walked in. Safe in a way she hadn't felt in 3 years of marriage. She wrapped her arms around herself as if to banish the thought. Inside, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You handled him well tonight. But don't confuse courage with invincibility. Chicago was just the beginning." Charlotte's chest tightened. She knew exactly who had sent it. Charles Walker. She closed her eyes, the night air cool against her skin. He wasn't wrong. Chicago was just the beginning. But this time, she wasn't the woman who waited quietly at a dining table. She was Charlotte Baker, and she would face whatever came next on her terms. New York in early winter gleamed like crystal under the streetlights, its avenues draped with holiday garlands and shop windows glowing gold and red. But for Charlotte Baker, the city carried an edge sharper than ice. Everywhere she turned, whispers about Vanessa Moore had begun to slither through the media cycle. Vanessa Moore was spotted leaving JFK in the Walker Group's private car. Hollywood's sweetheart returns to reclaim her first love, Charles Walker. Charlotte Baker, was she ever more than a placeholder? The headlines screamed from glossy covers at every newsstand, paparazzi flashes erupting on Fifth Avenue like fireworks. Charlotte sipped her morning coffee in her office, her phone buzzing nonstop with messages. She ignored most, focusing on fabric swatches for the fall collection. But when Kelly, her assistant, rushed in, pale-faced, Charlotte knew something bigger had broken. "Charlotte, you need to see this." On Kelly's tablet, the video played in perfect high definition. Vanessa Moore, radiant in a white coat and oversized sunglasses, walking out of a Manhattan charity gala. Microphones swarmed her. "Vanessa, are you here for Charles Walker?" Her lips curved in a dazzling smile. "Charles and I go back a long way. Some things never really end." The crowd gasped. "And Charlotte Baker," someone shouted. Vanessa paused delicately, as if the name were a faint memory. "I don't know her well, but marriages built on convenience rarely last. Charles deserves happiness." The clip ended. Kelly's eyes brimmed with outrage. "She practically erased you." Charlotte set the tablet down carefully, her hand steady though her pulse pounded. "Then let her try. The world may not know me yet, Kelly, but they will." 2 nights later, Charlotte received the inevitable summons from Evelyn Walker, Charles's formidable grandmother. The Walker estate in Greenwich was more fortress than home, sprawling lawns dusted with snow, the mansion glowing with warm light. Inside, portraits of ancestors glared down from gilded frames, their eyes heavy with expectation. Evelyn Walker sat in the parlor like a queen on her throne, pearls glistening at her throat, a glass of brandy in hand. Charles stood nearby, hands in his pockets, gaze sharp as ever. Charlotte Evelyn began, her voice smooth but edged. "I've always admired your resilience. But surely you see, the media circus is out of hand. Vanessa's return has rekindled old alliances and old investors. She belongs to this world. You." Evelyn's eyes lingered on Charlotte's dark skin, poised frame, and quiet defiance. "You may not." Charlotte felt the sting but refused to flinch. "With respect, Mrs. Walker, my worth is not measured by headlines or bloodlines. Results measure it. And the fashion division has grown under my leadership. Numbers don't lie." Evelyn's lips thinned. "Numbers don't silence scandal." Charles finally spoke, his tone clipped. "Enough, grandmother." The room stiffened. Evelyn arched a brow at him. "You defend her still?" His jaw tightened. "I defend what benefits the Walker Group." Charlotte caught the shift in his words, cold, calculated, but his eyes flickered toward her, and for the briefest second, she glimpsed something else, something unspoken. She straightened, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Let Vanessa shine for the cameras. I'll shine where it matters, on the stage of achievement. In the end, one burns brighter." The silence followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Days later, the formal invitation arrived. The Metropolitan Winter Gala, an event where New York's elite gathered under glittering chandeliers, their every move documented by the press. This year, Walker Group was a sponsor. Vanessa Moore was the celebrity guest. And by virtue of her position, Charlotte Baker was expected to attend. Maya's voice crackled through the phone when Charlotte told her, "This is a setup. They want you humiliated in public." Charlotte's voice was calm, resolute. "Then I'll walk in as myself, not as Mrs. Walker, not as anyone's shadow. If Vanessa wants a stage, I'll share it. Let the world decide." The Metropolitan's grand hall glimmered with crystal chandeliers, marble columns, and sweeping staircases in red velvet. Cameras flashed as limousines lined the curb, releasing gowns worth fortunes and tuxedos sharp enough to cut. Vanessa Moore arrived like a scene from a movie, her gown white as snow, her smile blinding, her hand resting gracefully on Charles Walker's arm. The crowd erupted. Charlotte entered moments later. She wore midnight blue silk, her gown sculpted with architectural precision, each fold and line a testament to her skill as a designer. No jewelry, but a single diamond at her throat. Elegance distilled into defiance. The room hushed. Cameras turned. For one breathless moment, two women stood on opposite ends of the grand hall. Vanessa, the golden star of Hollywood, and Charlotte, the phoenix rising from cold ashes. Whispers ignited. "She came. She looks extraordinary. This is going to explode." Charlotte's steps were slow and deliberate, with every movement proclaiming she belonged. It didn't take long. Vanessa drifted toward her with the practiced grace of a woman who'd lived in the spotlight her entire life. Her smile was sweet as poison. "Charlotte Baker," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby cameras to catch. "So brave of you to come." Charlotte's lips curved faintly. "Why wouldn't I? This is my city, my company's event. I wouldn't miss it." Vanessa tilted her head, feigning pity. "But surely it's exhausting playing a role you were never meant for. Charles and I, we share history, real history. That can't be replaced." Charlotte's dark eyes gleamed like tempered steel. "History is memory, Ms. Moore. The future is a choice, and Charles made his choice when he married me." The crowd gasped softly. Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time. She leaned closer, voice low but sharp. "Can you compete with me? With what I represent?" Charlotte's reply was velvet wrapped around steel. "I don't compete. I create. And creation always outlasts glamour." Flashes exploded around them, capturing every second. Charles had stood a few feet away, watching the exchange unfold, his expression carved in stone. When Vanessa looped her arm through his again, the cameras cheered. But his eyes flicked once, just once, toward Charlotte, and in them burned something neither pride nor anger could mask. Conflict. Charlotte saw it. And she smiled, not at him, not at Vanessa, but at herself. Because for the first time she realized she didn't need his defense. She had her own voice. By midnight, the internet was ablaze. Charlotte Baker stuns at Met Gala fashion, Phoenix. Vanessa Moore throws shade. Charlotte fires back. Charles Walker is caught between two women who truly owns his heart. In her hotel suite, Charlotte removed her gown carefully, her body aching from hours of scrutiny. She stood before the mirror, bare-faced now, and whispered to her reflection, "You didn't break." Her phone buzzed. A message again from that unknown number she already knew was his. "You looked unstoppable tonight." Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she set the phone aside. She would not answer. Not tonight. She slipped into bed, exhaustion pulling at her. But her heart was steady with new conviction. Vanessa Moore might have returned with her glitter and her headlines. Evelyn Walker might question her place. Charles himself might still be a storm she couldn't predict. But Charlotte Baker had found her stage. And she wasn't stepping off. Snow flurried against the glass walls of Walker Group's headquarters, swirling like restless ghosts over Manhattan. Inside the 32nd floor, the atmosphere was heavier than any winter storm. The fashion division's offices buzzed with hushed voices, nervous glances, and the quiet dread of catastrophe. Charlotte Baker stood at the center of it all, her hands resting lightly on the conference table as screens around the room displayed a brutal truth. Valerie Couture, Walker Group's fiercest European competitor, had unveiled their spring collection that morning in Paris. Every significant piece, cut silhouette, and daring color block was nearly identical to Charlotte's confidential designs for Walker's launch next month. The boardroom was ice. "This is sabotage," one executive muttered, or incompetence, another, cut in his gaze sharp on Charlotte. She straightened slowly, meeting their eyes. "These designs were locked in secure servers accessible only to my team. If they're on another runway, someone inside this company leaked them. But it wasn't me." A derisive laugh sounded. Daniel Rhodes, an older executive aligned with Evelyn Walker, leaned back in his chair. "Convenient, Ms. Baker. The ink is barely dry on your contract, and suddenly our flagship collection is compromised. If this isn't negligence, it's betrayal." Charlotte's jaw tightened. She could feel the noose of suspicion coiling, invisible but suffocating. By evening, the media had erupted. Walker Group scandal. Head of design. Charlotte Baker, accused of leak. Was she ever qualified or just a distraction? Vanessa Moore spotted, comforting. Charles Walker, amid crisis. Charlotte shut her office door against the storm, lowering herself into the chair as headlines scrolled endlessly across her phone. Kelly entered, timidly, eyes wide. "They're saying you emailed the files," she whispered. Charlotte froze. "What?" Kelly nodded, near tears. "It claims the leak came from your account." Charlotte rose instantly. "That's impossible." But she knew. Someone had set her up. And she didn't need to wonder long about who benefited. Vanessa Moore, the board members who resented her every whisper that she doesn't belong. They had all been waiting for this. That night, Charlotte faced Charles in his office. The space was dark, lit only by the Manhattan skyline through glass walls. He stood by the window, his silhouette tall and immovable, hands tucked into his pockets. "You saw the reports," Charlotte said, her voice low but steady. "I did." His tone was clipped, unreadable. "And do you believe them?" Silence. She stepped closer, anger sparking in her chest. "Answer me, Charles. Did I sell out your company?" Finally, he turned. His blue eyes locked onto hers, hard as steel, but beneath them was a flicker of conflict. "No," he said at last, his voice like a blade dragged across stone. "But the board does, and the press does, which means whether you're innocent or not, perception could destroy you." Her chest tightened. "So what will you do? Throw me to the wolves to protect your empire?" His jaw clenched. "That's what everyone expects me to do." They stood silently, the city pulsing around them, the space between their bodies charged like a wire ready to snap. Then Charles's voice dropped almost imperceptibly. "But I don't want to." The next morning, Walker Group convened an emergency press conference. Reporters swarmed the atrium, cameras flashing like lightning. Evelyn Walker sat in the front row, Vanessa gleaming beside her, lips curled in barely contained triumph. Charlotte stood on the stage, the weight of the world pressing against her shoulders. An executive spoke first. Due to allegations of a serious security breach under her leadership, Ms. Charlotte Baker will address the press. Whispers rippled. Cameras zoomed. Charlotte stepped forward, her voice steady, though her pulse roared. "Yes, a leak occurred. Yes, the designs you saw in Paris resemble mine. But let me be clear, I did not betray Walker Group. I did not betray my team. And I will prove it. Reporters shouted questions, and the room was a storm of accusations. And then Charles Walker rose from his seat. The crowd fell silent. He walked to the podium, his presence commanding every eye, every lens. He had been the face of ruthless certainty for years, a man who bowed to nothing, and now he placed himself beside Charlotte in front of the world. Walker Group. He began, his voice cold and sure, does not condemn its own without evidence. Charlotte Baker is head of design because she is the best, and until the truth comes out, she has my full support. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's lips thinned. Vanessa's smile cracked. Charlotte turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. The storm around them vanished for a split second, and all that remained was the undeniable reality Charles had chosen. After the press conference, Charlotte cornered him in the corridor. Why, she demanded. Why stand with me when it risks everything? He looked at her, his face unreadable. Because you're telling the truth, and because this company needs you. Her breath caught. The company. A flicker of something softer crossed his eyes. And maybe I do too. The admission, half confession, half escape, hung between them, trembling with possibilities. But before she could answer, his phone buzzed, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen, jaw hardening. They're moving faster than I thought, he muttered. This isn't just about you, Charlotte. Someone wants both of us destroyed. By week's end, Charlotte worked tirelessly with her team, retracing every digital footprint, hunting for proof. Late one night, Kelly rushed in breathless. We found it. The email wasn't sent from your laptop, it was sent remotely. Someone spoofed your credentials. Look, on the screen, a timestamp and IP address originating not from her office, but from an external device registered to a guest Wi-Fi account used during the Metropolitan Gala. Charlotte's breath froze. The gala, the night Vanessa paraded through the cameras whispering poison. It was no coincidence. We have to bring this to Charles, Kelly urged. Charlotte closed the laptop carefully. No, not yet. If we accuse without enough proof, they'll bury us both. We need the whole trail. Her heart pounded. The trap had been clever, almost flawless. But she had survived worse. And now, with Charles's unexpected allegiance, she wasn't fighting alone. That night she stood again by her office window, gazing at the snowfall streaking across Manhattan. The city glittered like ice and fire, merciless and beautiful. A knock sounded. She turned. Charles entered quietly, his presence filling the room. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You'll clear your name. I'll make sure of it." Charlotte's voice was soft, but firm. "No, Charles. We will. If you stand with me now, you stand against more than just rumor. You stand against the ghosts of your past, Vanessa, Evelyn, all of them. Can you?" His gaze held hers unflinching, but something vulnerable flickered deep within. "Yes," he said, and for the first time, Charlotte believed him. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something fragile yet powerful was being born, an alliance, a possibility, a spark neither could deny. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Charlotte Baker wasn't fighting in the shadows. She was fighting in the light. The boardroom of Walker Group had never felt colder. 30 floors above Fifth Avenue, the long table gleamed under harsh white lights, its polished surface reflecting the faces of men and women who held the empire's fate in their hands. Evelyn Walker sat at the head, pearls at her throat, her expression carved from granite. Vanessa Moore, though not officially part of the board, perched elegantly beside her, a vision of sympathy and poison wrapped in silk. And Charlotte Baker stood at the far end of the table, alone, unflinching alone. The agenda was simple, a vote of confidence. If she failed, she would be stripped of her role as head of design. If she succeeded, she would survive, but under a microscope, sharper than ever. Daniel Rhodes. Evelyn's loyal ally cleared his throat. With respect, Ms. Baker, the scandal has damaged our reputation internationally. Your presence is a liability, even if you weren't the direct cause. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Charlotte's palms pressed against the table, but her voice was steady. With respect, Mr. Rhodes, the scandal damaged us because you allowed rumor to override fact. I did not leak those designs, and while we sit here debating, I've spent nights rebuilding the collection with my team. If you give me the chance, we'll present something no competitor can touch. Vanessa's laugh rang like glass breaking. Rebuilding. Darling, you can't patch together brilliance. Fashion lives on reputation, and yours is already ash. Charlotte turned her gaze on her calm but sharp. Strange. You speak with remarkable authority for someone who claims no role in this company. Vanessa's smile faltered just briefly before Evelyn interjected. Enough. This meeting isn't for petty quarrels. We are here to protect the Walker Group. The vote will decide. Board members cast their words like stones, one by one. Remove her. Replace her too. Significant a risk. Charlotte stood tall, her heart pounding, her nails biting into her palms beneath the table. She had known this would come. She had braced for it. But each eye felt like another knife twisting into her spine. When only a few remained, Evelyn's eyes gleamed already, sure of victory. Charlotte Baker has no place here, Evelyn declared. This company must be rid of distractions. It was then that Charles rose from his seat. The room froze. Distractions. His voice was low measured, but carried a steel edge. Walker Group thrives on vision, on innovation. Charlotte has delivered both. Remove her, and you remove the only reason our fashion division hasn't collapsed entirely under outdated strategies. Evelyn's lips thinned. Charles, be sensible. Sentiment has no place here. Unreadable. His gaze flicked briefly to Charlotte before reverting to his grandmother. This isn't sentiment. It's survival. Vote her out and you'll regret it. The room erupted in murmurs again, but hesitation now colored the air. Charlotte's pulse quickened, not at his defense, but at the knowledge that his words had tilted the scale. Still, she knew words alone weren't enough. She needed more. When it was her turn to speak again, Charlotte reached calmly into her portfolio. I anticipated this, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the noise. And I came prepared. She spread a series of sketches across the table, designs no one had seen, not even Charles. Bold silhouettes inspired by New York's skyline textures, echoing steel and glass colors, daring enough to sear into memory. These are the new collection, she announced. Created after the sabotage, born from the ashes of theft. Each piece is already in prototype. As for the leak, she tapped a document on the table, and our IT department traced the false email to a device registered on the night of the Metropolitan Gala. A device was used not by my team or me, but by someone with access to Walker's guest accounts. She didn't say Vanessa's name. She didn't need to. Gasps rippled. Vanessa's face blanched, then flushed crimson. Evelyn's eyes narrowed like daggers. Charlotte lifted her chin. So vote if you must. Remove me, and you remove the future of this company. Keep me, and I'll prove that Walker Group can still lead, not follow. The silence that followed was electric. The vote passed barely, but in her favor. Charlotte remained head of design. As the boardroom emptied, Evelyn swept past her without a word. Vanessa trailing like a shadow, her fury barely masked. Charles lingered. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was low when he finally spoke. You took a risk showing those designs before they're protected. Charlotte's lips curved faintly. Sometimes risk is the only language people like them understand. His eyes searched hers, sharp yet softened by something she couldn't name. "You could have lost everything. But I didn't," she replied quietly. "Not today." Their gazes held the air charged with something unspoken, something dangerous, undeniable. That night, as Charlotte returned to her apartment, an envelope lay waiting at her door. No name stamp, just her initials, scrawled across the front. Inside was a single note written in elegant script. "You think you've won, but wars aren't decided in boardrooms. Watch your back." Her hand tightened around the paper. She didn't need to wonder who had sent it. Vanessa, exhausted but unbroken. Charlotte poured herself a glass of wine and stepped onto her balcony. Manhattan glittered below, endless and merciless. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a small smile. She had survived. More than that, she had proven she was not just surviving on Charles Walker's shadow. She was carving her place and voice in a world that was designed to erase her. And though the war was far from over tonight, she had won a battle that mattered. Her phone buzzed a message. "Charles, you were extraordinary today. Don't forget that." She set the phone down without replying, but her smile deepened faint and secret. Because deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The city no longer felt safe. Charlotte Baker had always loved Manhattan, the hum of yellow cabs, the neon glint of Times Square, the quiet glow of late-night cafes where strangers dreamed aloud. But in recent weeks, every street corner felt watched. Every shadow carried weight. The first warning had been the anonymous note at her door. The second came 2 days later, her car's brakes cut, discovered only because her driver insisted on a maintenance check before leaving the garage. And now, as she walked home after another exhausting day, Charlotte felt the unmistakable sensation of footsteps following her. Slow, deliberate. She gripped her purse tighter, quickened her pace. The winter wind lashed against her cheeks, her heels clicking too loudly on the pavement. She turned a corner empty. Another still, the echo followed. Just as panic threatened to crush her chest, a black town car pulled up beside the curb. The window lowered. "Get in," Charles's voice commanded. For a moment, she froze. Pride battled with fear. But then she saw a shadow moving behind her, and instinct chose for her. She slid into the car, the door shutting with a heavy thud. Charles sat beside her, jaw taut, his blue eyes fierce. "You should have called me," he said. Charlotte retorted, "I don't need a bodyguard, though." Her voice trembled. His gaze darkened. "This isn't about pride. Someone is trying to hurt you." She looked away out the tinted window at the city streaking past. "You think it's Vanessa?" "I don't think," he said. "I know." The certainty in his tone stole her breath. That night, Charles insisted she stay at his penthouse on the Upper East Side. She argued, of course, refused even, but he had that immovable steel in his eyes, which brooked no negotiation. The penthouse was vast, with glass walls framing the city skyline, every detail exuding wealth and precision. But what struck Charlotte most was not the luxury, but the subtle signs of solitude. Untouched books, glasses of whiskey left unfinished, a piano covered in dust. "You live like a ghost," she murmured. Charles glanced at her unamused. Better a ghost than a target. She turned to face him. "Is that what you think I am? A target?" For the first time, his expression cracked. His voice softened low and raw. "You're the one thing they can use against me, and I won't let them." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him not to make this about him, not to assume her strength was fragile. But the truth was, her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from how he said it. 2 days later, danger struck again. Charlotte was scheduled to present prototypes of her new collection to potential investors at Walker's downtown showroom. The atmosphere buzzed with journalists' cameras and the scent of anticipation. She excused herself briefly to the back office, and that was when it happened. The lights flickered, the door slammed shut behind her, and the sharp sting of smoke filled the air. The fire alarm blared. Panic surged through her veins. She grabbed a scarf, pressed it to her mouth, and tried to find an exit, but every handle was locked. The smoke thickened, choking, clawing. For one terrifying moment she thought, this is how it ends. Buried in ashes, silenced forever. Then the door burst open. Strong arms pulled her through the haze, lifted her into the cold air outside. Charles. His face was grim, his suit streaked with ash, his hands trembling as he set her down. Are you hurt? Charlotte coughed violently, shaking her head. Tears pricked her eyes, not from weakness, but from fury. They tried to kill me. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing soot from her cheek. For once, the cold CEO facade was gone, stripped away. I won't let them touch you again. Do you hear me, Charlotte? Never again. News of the fire was shared across media outlets within hours. Officially, it was labeled an electrical malfunction. Unofficially, whispers spread sabotage, an attempt to scare Charlotte away. Maybe even worse. Vanessa, of course, played her role flawlessly. On camera, she offered sympathy with crocodile tears. It breaks my heart to see Charlotte in danger, she told reporters, her hand squeezing Evelyn's for effect. But this may prove she isn't safe in Charles's world. Charlotte watched the clip from Charles's penthouse, fury simmering. She wants me gone one way or another. Charles's jaw hardened. Then she'll have to go through me first. Charlotte turned to him, eyes sharp. Why? Why risk everything for me? His answer was quiet, but it struck like thunder. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my responsibility. The air between them thickened, charged with something neither could deny anymore. Later that night, Charlotte stepped onto the penthouse balcony, the city glowing beneath her like an endless sea of stars. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, the chill biting through silk. Charles joined her silently, a glass of whiskey in his hand. For a long time they stood without speaking. Finally, she whispered, I should leave. The longer I stay, the more danger follows me. His voice was low, unyielding. No. The danger follows you because they fear you, because you're not the easy target they thought you were. She turned her face toward him, her eyes catching the city lights. And what do you fear, Charles? His jaw tightened. For once his walls cracked. Losing you. Her breath caught. The words were quiet, almost stolen by the wind, but they landed deep, irrevocable. And for the first time in years, Charlotte allowed herself to lean closer just slightly enough for the space between them to tremble. The next morning brought new threats, emails, anonymous calls, subtle reminders that Vanessa's reach was long and merciless. But something had changed. Charles no longer treated Charlotte as a liability. He began involving her directly in security meetings, placing her name beside his in decisions that mattered. His actions spoke louder than the words he barely dared to say. He trusted her. He needed her. And Charlotte, though, wary of his world, felt the shift. Something fragile, yet undeniable, was forged between the shadows of danger and the embers of survival. It wasn't just an alliance anymore. It was the first spark of love, terrifying and unstoppable. One evening, as Charlotte left the Walker Tower, she found a single red rose on the hood of her car. Its petals were fresh, vivid against the black metal. Attached was a note in the same elegant script as before. A flower for the funeral I'll attend. Yours. Her blood ran cold. She tore the note to shreds, her hands trembling, but then she felt a shadow fall over her. Charles stood beside her, silent, his presence grounding her. He picked up the rose, snapped the stem clean in half, and tossed it aside. His voice was quiet, almost a vow. They want war. then we'll give them war. Together. And for the first time, Charlotte didn't feel like prey. She felt like fire. The weeks that followed the fire were a blur of whispers and plotting. Charlotte Baker moved through the halls of Walker Group with her head high, though she knew eyes followed her everywhere. Some have doubts, some with pity, and others like Vanessa's with venom, barely veiled by painted smiles. But beneath Charlotte's calm exterior, something fierce had awakened. She was done playing defense. It was Kelly who found the crack. One late night as the office lights burned low, Kelly burst into Charlotte's studio, clutching a tablet. "You need to see this." On the screen, a series of emails. They weren't just about the leaked designs, they included payment transfers. Funds routed through offshore accounts, all landing in a shell company, traced back to Vanessa Moore's private foundation. Charlotte's pulse quickened. She paid someone inside IT. Kelly nodded. "And if we connect this with the guest Wi-Fi device at the gala?" Charlotte leaned back slowly, the pieces clicking into place. Then Vanessa's mask will finally crack. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a smile. Sharp, certain. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Evelyn Walker had protected Vanessa for years. Exposing her in a boardroom would end in cover-ups and spin. No, this needed to happen in the one arena Vanessa could never control, the public stage. Charlotte's mind turned to the upcoming Walker Group Spring Showcase, the event that would decide the company's future in fashion after the scandal. Hundreds of eyes, cameras from every outlet, a global stage. Perfect. She told Charles her plan 2 nights later in the quiet of his penthouse. He stood by the window, hands shoved into his pockets, his reflection fractured against the city skyline. "You want to expose Vanessa?" On the runway, Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "Not just expose her. Redefine who I am. I won't be the victim of her games anymore. I'll be the woman who burned her lies in front of the world." For a long moment, silence stretched. Then Charles crossed the room, stopping inches away. His voice was low, steady. "You could destroy her, but you could also destroy yourself if this backfires." Her chin lifted. "Then I'll take that risk because I'm tired of surviving. I want to win." Something flickered in his eyes, admiration fierce and unguarded. Slowly he reached for her hand. "Then we win. Together." Her breath caught at the warmth of his touch. For weeks they had circled one another in shadows, caught between war and unspoken desire. Now in the glow of the city, their alliance felt like more than strategy. It felt like fate. The spring showcase arrived with the glitter of diamonds and the weight of destiny. The Walker Group venue gleamed with crystal chandeliers, and the runway stretched like a silver blade across the room. Reporters filled every corner, their lenses ready to capture triumph or failure. Backstage, Charlotte's team moved with precision. Models slipped into gowns of steel gray silk, midnight velvet gold threads, glinting like skyscraper lights. The collection was bold, architectural, unapologetic. New York itself, stitched into fabric. Kelly adjusted the last seam, whispering, "They'll remember tonight forever." Charlotte smoothed the gown of the lead model, her own heartbeat steady. That's the point. Halfway through the show, the audience gasped as screens behind the runway flickered to life. At first, it seemed like part of the presentation, images of New York's skyline, the inspiration for the designs. But then, numbers appeared. Dates, wire transfers, email threads. The audience leaned forward, murmurs rising. And then came the final slide, Vanessa Moore's name tied directly to the payments that funded the leak. The room erupted. Vanessa shot up from her seat, her face drained of color. "This is outrageous," she cried, her voice shrill. Lies, fabricated lies. But the evidence glowed undeniably across the screens, and every transaction marked with digital fingerprints, was impossible to refute. Charlotte walked onto the runway, dressed not in a gown, but a tailored suit of midnight silk. Her voice carried through the stunned silence. Fashion is about truth, about vision, about creating something that cannot be stolen. Tonight you have seen my collection and the truth behind the theft. Clearly, Walker Group's designs were sabotaged, not by incompetence, but by deceit. And deceit has a name. She turned her gaze directly on Vanessa. Calm, icy, unflinching. Yours. Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters shouted. Security closed in as Vanessa shrieked, lunging toward the stage. Evelyn Walker tried to intervene, but the tide had already turned. By the night's end, Vanessa had been escorted out, her reputation crumbling across every major outlet in real time. Vanessa Moore exposed in corporate scandal. Charlotte Baker emerges as the phoenix of Walker Group. Charlotte stood backstage, the adrenaline rushing through her veins like fire. She had done it. She had turned the trap into her triumph. And then Charles appeared. He pulled her into his arms without hesitation, without the restraint that had defined him for so long. You were magnificent, he murmured against her hair. You burned her world to ashes. Charlotte closed her eyes, the weight of his embrace breaking through every wall she had built. And you finally chose me. He pulled back just enough to meet her gaze, his blue eyes fierce, unwavering. I chose you long before tonight. I didn't dare to admit it. And then he kissed her deep, certain the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt. The war had birthed something neither of them had expected, something that tasted like survival, like destiny, like love. The next morning, headlines hailed Charlotte not just as a designer, but as a force. Charlotte Baker, from scandal to savior of Walker Group, the woman who brought down Vanessa Moore. For once, she wasn't described as Charles Walker's wife. She was Charlotte Baker, her own name, her own power. But victory carried shadows. As she stood on her balcony that night sipping tea, Kelly's voice echoed in her mind. It's not over, you know. People like Vanessa don't just disappear. And she knew Kelly was right. Even in ruin, Vanessa's eyes had gleamed with something wild, dangerous. A promise that this wasn't the end. But for now, Charlotte allowed herself a moment of peace. A moment in Charles's arms, the city blazing beneath them, the war quiet for just one night. Because tomorrow, the final battle would come, and she would be ready. The city was alive with whispers. Though Vanessa Moore had been publicly disgraced, the air around Walker Group remained heavy, charged with something unfinished. Charlotte could feel it every time she entered the tower. Eyes watching, silence stretching too long. Footsteps echoing in places they shouldn't. Victory had been hers on the runway, yes. But in Vanessa's eyes, those burning, furious eyes as security dragged her out, Charlotte had seen a vow, and vows had a way of returning. Charles insisted on tighter security, on escorts, on sealed files, and encrypted systems. Yet Charlotte still refused to live like a prisoner. I won't let her fear steal the life I fought for, she told him one evening, as they walked along the Hudson winter winds, brushing against their faces. Charles stopped his gaze, intense, his hand tightening around hers. And I won't let her steal you from me. For a moment, the world hushed around them. The city lights blurred. The river glistened, and Charlotte saw not the cold, ruthless CEO everyone else knew, but a man stripped bare, a man who had chosen her again and again. Her heart ached with a fierce tenderness. Then we face her together. He nodded, and a promise was sealed between them in that quiet vow. It came 3 nights later. The Walker Group Winter Gala glittered with crystal chandeliers and champagne laughter. Dignitaries, investors, designers, everyone who mattered filled the ballroom. Charlotte wore a gown of deep emerald silk, the fabric flowing like liquid night. Charles stood beside her, his presence commanding, his hand firm on her back. For a while, it almost felt safe. Almost. Until the lights cut out. A scream tore through the dark. Then another. Panic spread like fire. When the emergency lights flickered back on, chaos erupted. Guests fled, glasses shattered, and at the center of it all, Vanessa Moore stood eyes wild, a pistol gleaming in her hand. "Did you think you'd won?" "Charlotte." Vanessa's voice was ragged sharp. "Did you think you could humiliate me, strip me of everything and walk away untouched?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security froze uncertain. Charlotte's blood turned to ice, but her spine stayed straight. "Vanessa, this isn't the way." "Oh, it's the only way," Vanessa spat. Her gaze darted between Charlotte and Charles. "I'll take from you what you tried to take from me. Your empire, your love, your life." In the split second, Vanessa raised the gun. Charles moved. He stepped in front of Charlotte, his body shielding hers completely. The room erupted in screams, guards rushing forward, but time slowed an eternity in a heartbeat. Charlotte gasped, clutching at his arm. His voice was low, steady, meant only for her. "If it ends tonight, it ends with me keeping you safe." The shot rang out, but instead of Charlotte's scream, Vanessa's cry split the air. A guard had tackled her at the last moment, the bullet grazing Charles's shoulder, but sparing his life. The gun clattered to the marble floor. Vanessa thrashed, shrieking, as security restrained her. "You'll never have peace. You'll never." Her words were swallowed by chaos as she was dragged away for the final time. Charlotte pressed trembling hands against Charles's wound, tears blurring her vision. You're bleeding, oh God!" He caught her face in his hand, pulling her close despite the pain. His eyes, though dimmed, burned with certainty. "I'd bleed 1,000 times if it means I still get to look at you." Her heart shattered and healed all at once. In the aftermath, investigations revealed everything. Vanessa had not acted alone. Evelyn Walker, desperate to maintain control of her empire, had enabled her from the shadows. But with proof undeniable, the board stripped Evelyn of her authority. Walker Group stood free of her iron grip for the first time in decades. Charles and Charlotte are side by side at the helm, not just as CEO and head of design, but as something more profound, as partners, as equals. Weeks later, in the quiet of the penthouse, Charles took Charlotte to the piano he had left untouched for years. "I stopped playing the night my parents died," he admitted softly, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Music felt like something I didn't deserve anymore." Charlotte's hand rested over his. "Then play again. Play for what you found now." He did. And when the final note lingered in the air, he turned to her eyes unguarded, a small velvet box in his hand. "Charlotte Baker," he said, his voice trembling with a vulnerability no one else would ever hear. "You walked into my life when I was nothing but ice. You fought me, challenged me, and saved me. You showed me what it means to love, to live. Will you marry me?" Tears slipped down her cheeks, her answer a whisper and a vow. "Yes." He kissed her, then a kiss that sealed not just a promise, but a forever. The spring air of Central Park carried blossoms, petals falling like confetti against the azure sky. Charlotte walked down the aisle in a gown of her own design, white silk, elegant yet fierce with lines that whispered power and grace. Charles waited at the altar, his gaze fixed only on her. When their hands met and their vows bound them, there was no empire scandal or shadow, only love. "I promise," Charles said, his voice breaking, "to spend every day proving that you are my beginning, end, and always." "And I promise," Charlotte whispered, "to never let fear silence me again. To walk beside you through fire, through storm, until forever." Their kiss sealed not just a marriage, but a destiny. Applause thundered, petals rained, and their hearts were at peace for the first time. Months later, Charlotte stood in the Walker Group studio. Sketches spread across her desk, one hand absently resting on her stomach. Charles appeared in the doorway, his smile softer than the sunrise. Designing for 3 now, he teased gently. Her cheeks warmed, but her eyes sparkled. For 4, twins. He crossed the room in 2 strides, lifting her into his arms, laughter breaking from his chest. You've given me an empire, Charlotte. But this is the only legacy I'll ever need. And as the city roared outside, their laughter filled the room, 2 souls scarred but whole, rising from the ashes into a love that would never die. Charlotte Baker and Charles Walker found survival, victory, and love, fierce, unyielding, eternal. If this story moved you, if you felt the fire, the heartbreak, the passion, don't let it end here. Like this video to show your love. Comment below and share your thoughts. What moment stole your breath? Share it with friends who believe in love that conquers even the darkest storms. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel to never miss another story that stirs your soul. Because sometimes the battles we fight lead us not to ruin, but to forever.